On this Friday, Fox News alert: President Trump is vowing tough action on asylum seekers as he seizes on immigration in the final days ahead of the midterm elections. We go outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. With just 4 days until Election Day, President Trump is announcing he will sign an executive order next week that will restrict asylum rules to close the door on Central American immigrants trekking to the United States in those caravans. This as 1,000 active duty U.S. troops have now arrived at the border, with more expected to follow. Watch.
I will therefore take every lawful action at my disposal to address this crisis. My administration is finalizing a plan to end the rampant abuse of our asylum system. It's abused, to halt a dangerous influx and to establish control over America's sovereign borders.
The president, in his remarks, also suggested that troops can fire on migrants who throw rocks at soldiers. Is that what he meant? The president's urgency comes as the Department of Homeland Security says the caravans include nearly 300 people with criminal histories. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us now from the North Lawn. And that comment, John, about rocks equal to rifles has some people talking today. I just want the facts.
Yeah, sure. And let's get to that in just a second. But first of all, let's deal with what the president was talking about yesterday in terms of these asylum claims. You'll remember yesterday we laid that out for you in some measure of detail. Well, the president doing the same thing yesterday. Currently, when anybody who crosses the border illegally is allowed to claim asylum in the United States. But the president, on his way out the door yesterday when he was going to Columbia, Missouri, said he plans to have an executive order in place next week that will change the location and the system by which people can claim asylum in the United States. Listen to what he said.
Under this plan, the illegal aliens will no longer get a free pass into our country by lodging meritless claims in seeking asylum. Instead, migrants seeking asylum will have to present themselves lawfully at a port of entry. Those who choose to break our laws and enter illegally will no longer be able to use meritless claims to gain automatic admission into our country.
Now, the executive order is still being worked on, but I'm told it will incorporate the authority of the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, and the president's powers under Article 2 of the Constitution. It is another tool that the president is using to try to deter people in these caravans and other migrants from entering the United States illegally. The president insists that there is a big difference between people who have a legitimate claim to asylum and economic refugees. He says the United States simply cannot afford to absorb into the country everyone who wants to come here to make a better life. He also plans to end the long-held practice of catch and release. He says the military is building tent cities big enough to house the current flow of illegal migrants and that they will be held there until their cases are adjudicated and they are either allowed to stay in the United States by virtue of their claim or removed back to their home countries. The only problem with that is the president is still up against that 1997 court order that says you can only hold children for 20 days before you have to release them in some way. I'm told that there is some policy that's being worked on to change that, but that hasn't yet been cooked. Now, to what you asked at the very top here, the president saying yesterday that he has told the military, and I assume the Border Patrol as well, that any of these migrants who start throwing rocks as they were against the Mexican police, the Mexican military should be treated as if they have a rifle in their hands. Now, not to say that this would ever happen, Harris, because I don't know if it would, but if the U.S. military started shooting people coming across the border who were throwing rocks, that would be disastrous in so many ways. Harris?
It sounded, and I'm glad that we kind of went back over the nomenclature and the rocks versus rifles. And, you know, it's always going to get your critics and your opponents talking. It sounded like the president was making the point that he didn't want to see happen to our people what he saw with the military authorities on the ground and local police officers in Mexico.
Yeah, and he made that point several times. He said, look at the violence that was done against the police. Look at how these people crashed across the border. Look at how they fought with the military. He says he's not going to let that happen on the border. But again, using lethal force in a case of people crossing the border illegally, I mean, I think that kind of gets, I don't want to say it gets us back to Kent State, but I think a lot of people would see it in very similar fashion.
Well, we aren't saying the president ever said that, and we're not suggesting it, but I'm so glad that we got to talk about exactly the words that were used and drill down. John Roberts, always great reporting. Thank you outside the White House. Good to see you. Let's now be joined by Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCaul, chair of the House Homeland Security Committee. Fabulous to have you on the program today. So important to get your perspective and expertise. So let's just start with the idea of asylum seekers. And I'm looking at the percentages over the years. Are there a growing number of people trying to do this? Are they gaming a loophole? What's happening?
Well, I think most of them are gaming the system. They come in, they know the magic words to say, and then they're allowed to stay in the United States. I mean, the fact is the Mexican government, I talked to the Mexican ambassador, he told me they offered the caravan asylum in Mexico. This is a safe third country that they could seek asylum in from their original country of Central America, Honduras, El Salvador. It seems to me that's the place to make your asylum claim. And so what we did, I think what the president's trying to do is a showing of force, number one, with our active duty military, but also to say, look, we're not going to take bogus asylum claims. We're going to up the standards. And by the way, you got to apply at the ports of entry, not between the ports of entry. And that's very significant. Now, will this caravan follow that? I don't know. I mean, I can easily see them going between the ports of entry, and that's going to be a real issue. But we've seen the coyotes and the drug cartels game the system time and time again. And until, Harris, we send the message that if you come, you can't stay in the United States, they're going to continue to come.
So now that's interesting, Chairman McCaul, because that's what the president is trying to do, he says, by putting up tents along the border for people to be detained while they await the processing.
That's right. And so for the first time, we have our active duty under what's called Title 10, which is very significant. Before, it's always been the Guard under a different authority, sort of assisting Border Patrol, like, pushing paper. But now we've got active duty military armed right on the border itself, working with Border Patrol. So that's a very significant departure. I hope it provides some deterrence to this caravan. And I think this executive order coming up where he's saying, I'm going to change the asylum laws. I do think John Roberts is correct. However, he's going to have an issue with this, what's called the Flores decision, which requires these children to be released in 20 days. And I think that's going to be what you're going to see happening. Chairman Goodlatte and I fixed this problem. We had a bill on the floor, my border bill, his closing legal loopholes in DACA, and every Democrat voted against it. Our bill, had it passed then, would have stopped this caravan from ever coming, or if they came to the United States, we could deport them. Problem now is, Harris, once they set foot in the United States, due process and protection, legal protection, will come into action.
Yeah, and I mean, what we have right now is people just fanning out all over the country. And our William Lajeunesse talked directly with some of the men inside that caravan. He didn't talk to everybody, but he talked to a few. And they told him, look, if we can't work it out via asylum, we're going to come in illegally, which means they're not coming in necessarily at ports of entry. They're going to come across that porous border. I know Nogales very well, McAllen, Texas. I know those areas. I have family down there. So I understand where they're going to be coming across. It's your state. I want to give you final word.
Well, the Rio Grande Valley sector is the closest sector to the caravan. They're approaching Mexico City. It's important to note we have 4 caravans now, about 11,000 people, complete lawlessness, moving up towards where your relatives are, probably in the Rio Grande Valley sector. We have to get some law and order here. It's chaos right now. And not to get political, but these elections coming up, I really think the American people need to decide, do they want an open border to allow all these people to come in? Or do they want a controlled border, a secure border, where we can stop, 11,000 people, many of whom are known criminals and some maybe potentially terrorists, from getting in the United States.
Before I let you go real quickly, the Pentagon says it will not be building tents for detention. They're going to build tents for the Customs and Border. What do you make of that?
Well, again, under case law and statutory, I think tents could provide a problem. I know that the president would prefer to do that, problem, again, Harris, is we don't have enough detention space to hold 11,000 people.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that case, right? If you have to release them in 20 days, if you don't even have detention space to hold them.
Chairman McCall, thank you for your time from the great state of Texas. We'll bring you back. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harris.
Let's get reaction now from the other side of the political aisle. California Democrat John Garamendi, who sits on the Armed Services Committee and often joins us. We're glad to have you back to the program. Good to see you today. These are tough issues. I'm hoping you could hear some of what Chairman McCall was talking about. He got to politics very little at the end. What he's talking about is the logistics of dealing with people trying to, what he said, game the system of asylum that we've set up. What do you say?
Well, certainly there will be some that are gaming the system, and there are others that have a legitimate asylum story to tell. And frankly, we have a system set up. It is insufficient in its capacity to deal with the numbers of people that are seeking asylum. But international treaties to which we are participants and our own laws really require that we go through a very appropriate and careful process of determining the legitimacy of the asylum seeker's story. If I recall some of the issue that occurred last spring, where there were numerous well, actually a very large number of people seeking asylum, many of them illegally crossing the border. They had attempted to cross at the points of entry, but those were frankly choke points, and it took forever to try to go through those legal processes, so they came across illegally. Those people, nevertheless, went through the appropriate process. Many of them were released with ankle bracelets determining where they were, and if I recall the statistic, maybe 90%, 95, 98% of those people actually reported at the appropriate time, at the appropriate place to have their hearing. And the majority of them were rejected, and they were sent home. Now, there was the problem of the separation of the children. In fact, that remains a problem today.
I want to step in so we can get to some other things.
Sure.
When you have 11,000 people, you want to talk about a choke point? There's no way those people can go all through ports of entry. So my question is,
well, actually,
if some of them come across or they're waiting for the processing, what would you have the president and this administration do? Would it be tense? Our detention centers are overrun. You've got children that are going to be let go after 20 days. I mean, these people are coming, and it is putting a pressure on our system. And it may be weeks. Maybe it's December. And maybe it's not all about Tuesday. But it's not like they're turning around.
Well, Harris, we are a very capable, competent country.
Right, but we currently have about 11 to 13 million people here illegally already. We're competent, but can we handle it as it comes to our border?
Absolutely we can if we are competent in the administrative processes. Will the military be part of the solution? Yes, it already is. Some of the military bases are currently being used, but of course I'm okay with that, but I think we ought to be very, very careful here. You talk about choke points. There are points of entry in the United States where thousands of vehicles pass every hour through those ports of entry. It is entirely possible for us to handle 11,000 people at the various ports of entry and do it properly if we are prepared administratively with an organizational structure that is set up to do that. And that is, frankly, the president's responsibility. With regard to the laws, yes, we can change the laws, and certainly we know that the immigration laws don't work. Both Democrats and Republicans agree to that, and there have been efforts, bipartisan efforts, to deal with the comprehensive immigration reform, which is absolutely essential, and all of us agree that part of that comprehensive reform has to be border security. Walls, fences where appropriate, and appropriate points of entry that are sufficient in staffing and facility to handle whatever the flow might be, both commercial as well as individuals seeking asylum. This is entirely possible.
Because you're saying some of the things that the Trump administration has been saying all along, too. You call it a fencing. The president calls it a wall, and shoring that up. It is some of the same nomenclature to get us to the same place. So I see the bipartisan middle that you're seeking there. It is interesting. I wanted two people today, one from a border state, Texas, and one from a California state as well.
Also
that's
a border state.
And a border state, you both. So thank you. I appreciate your time today. We'll bring you back as always.
Harris. Thank you.
A big move by the Trump administration announcing it is reimposing all sanctions on Iran that were lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal starting Monday. A live report from the State Department. Plus, Republicans reportedly leaning on President Trump's rallies on the final stretch of the midterm elections. Can the president help carry the GOP across the finish line? Or is his campaign presence energizing Democrats? We'll talk with the president's daughter-in-law. Laura Trump is here, senior advisor for the Trump 2020 re-election campaign. Watch it.
It's amazing when you do get to see President Trump on the road. I know you all have seen him on the road and how he's connecting with everyday Americans. And it is sharing that the only way we continue upon this success, the successful path, is if we have more candidates that support the president's policies.
Today, Kevin Corke joins us in Huntington, West Virginia. You're on the trail, Kevin.
Yes, indeed. And I have to tell you, Harris, the real question today is, will the president's visit here be the difference? Will it tip the balance in favor of Patrick Morrisey over his Democrat challenger and the incumbent, in this case, Joe Manchin, who continues to be very popular here in the Mountain State, in part perhaps because of his vote for then Judge, now Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That decision very popular here in West Virginia. And it also, I think, to be fair, seems that the president tamped down that criticism of Manchin after the vote, though he'll probably hear a bit of it here this afternoon. Now, last night in the Show Me State of Missouri, the president tried to help tip the balance, Harris, in another key Senate race, this one between Josh Hawley and Claire McCaskill. The latest survey showing Hawley leading McCaskill, whose party, the president says, is out of touch with the American people.
The Democrat agenda is the agenda of the extreme far left. They've gone crazy, folks. They've gone totally loco. The Democrats are the party of rigid ideology and total conformity. They demand absolute agreement, and they dismiss, demean, and demonize anyone who questions their radical ideas.
So as you pointed out, just 4 days, Harris, before the big day, and that means a sprint to the finish continuing here in West Virginia and Indiana tonight. By the way, the president will be at a high school auditorium tonight. That doesn't sound very big, but keep this in mind. That auditorium in Indiana seats 7,300 people. It's expected to draw about 10,000 tonight. Montana, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri again, Ohio and Indiana all in the offing. And I think it's fair to say we'll be keeping an eye on that Georgia battle for governor between Kemp and Abrams. You saw the vice president there yesterday. The president goes on Sunday. We've seen Obama and Oprah all visit. A big race indeed. 4 o'clock today here in West Virginia. Of course, I'll be ready for live coverage. Harris, back to you.
All right, we'll be ready for more of that. Always good to see you, Kevin Corke. Thank you very much. Laura Trump is here, senior advisor for the Trump 2020 presidential campaign, and who is also President Trump's daughter-in-law. We'll mention that. That grandson is so gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
It's good to see you. Let's talk, if we can, about the component of having a president in a battleground state.
Yeah.
Where candidates have their own issues, but he's bringing his own bag of stuff as well.
Well, people love to see this president. We had 100,000 people RSVP to the rally in Houston, which was the last one I was at with him. That's unprecedented. People are always excited to see the president, and he is doing such a great job, Harris, of getting the message out as to why these midterms are so important, why people need to get out and vote on Tuesday, and they need to vote for Republicans. So I think he's been so effective at, obviously, everywhere he goes, people pay attention, and the message he's delivering, I really do think is getting through.
So, Laura, you know, I mentioned that there are already issues on the ground. Most of them are economic. They're health care. That's what we're seeing. The president has talked some about that. He's focused on immigration and the border and the caravan. How do you square that with the issues where voters are in different areas?
I think what people are coming up to me and saying, and what people need to remember, is how far we've come in this country. Since Donald Trump took office, look at the economy, Harris. The fact is that people's lives are a lot better. And it's a little bit hearkening back to Reagan. You know, is your life better now than it was 2 years ago? It's morning in America again. And here we are. You have an opportunity to continue the great progress that we've seen under President Trump by voting for Republicans in the House and Senate.
Well, and it's confusing a little bit because when you talk about that, I mean, look at the job creation. The jobs numbers that came out today, the 3.7 unemployment. When you look at those issues, it seems like other Republicans are not focused on it as well. So the president comes in, he talks about the caravan, so on and so forth. He gets the crowd riled up. But Republicans are not talking about the good things that you're talking about.
Well, I think that's a huge mistake, because that is really what people care about in this country. And I think when Donald Trump was running in 2016, he promised to do this. He promised to get this economy roaring, and he's delivered that promise. And here we are. We want to see it go forward. We want to see more great things from this president. But the only way he can do that is obviously to have help from Congress. And we need Republicans to vote alongside him.
So the last rally you were at was in Houston. And this is tough because we've had a lot of things happen in this country.
Yeah.
What is it like on the ground in the rallies when you've got the opposite optic, if you will, that the heartbreak that this country is feeling for some of the things that have happened with the Pittsburgh synagogue? Should the president have taken a pause? What you're there, you're with him. Give me the temperature.
Well, listen, I think that it's very important to be incredibly respectful to something as awful and tragic as what we've seen happen in this country. The synagogue was an absolutely disgusting act. Unfortunately, it is obviously a mentally ill individual. The thing is, we plan these rallies out so far in advance. We alert people to them, and the president never wants to disappoint the people. So when he knows they're excited to see him, he's always excited to be there. He doesn't want to let them down. He doesn't like canceling rallies and events like this. But I think that he gave the right message. He paid his condolences. He condemned the whole thing, which is exactly right. We have no space in our country for anything like that. But the people want to come out. They want to see the president. They want to hear from him.
Well, that's so interesting. He may not have gotten enough credit for some of the things that he said on the ground in a widespread fashion. We could talk mainstream media all day long. But you're right, and he's got a captive audience there to say it.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Have fun.
I know.
I know you're a new mom, so it's a lot. Laura Trump, it's always great to see you.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks.
4 days till Tuesday. Be sure to tune in to Fox News Channel, speaking of Tuesday, on election night for special live coverage of the critical midterms. Brett Baer, Martha McCallum will have all the breaking developments starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'll also be part of that coverage, providing a look at which way certain races are leaning and which ones have been called already. It'll be a long, fun night. Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, don't miss it. The Trump administration is ramping up tension with Iran, reimposing all U.S. sanctions that were lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal. Will the economic pain nuclear deal? The sanctions will go into effect on Monday and will hit Iran's shipping, financial, and energy sectors. It's the second batch of penalties reimposed since President Trump withdrew from the six-nation nuclear deal in May. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had this to say while speaking on a conference call earlier today.
This part of the campaign about which we're speaking today is simple. It is aimed at depriving the regime of the revenues that it uses to spread death and destruction around the world. Our ultimate aim is to compel Iran to permanently abandon its well-documented outlaw activities and behave as a normal country.
Rich Edson is live at the State Department. Rich?
Hey, good afternoon, Harris. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says these sanctions will be the strongest ever to hit Iran as part of a way to try to compel Iran's leadership to negotiate with this administration.
Missile proliferation, terrorism, terror finance, cyber attacks, and maritime aggression, human rights. These are the things where we need Iran to change its behavior. And we intend to seek a new deal with Iran that addresses the entire range of Iran's threats to peace and security.
Iran says these sanctions will ultimately fail. The administration effort focuses on cutting Iran's oil exports. Officials say since May, Iran's oil exports have dropped by about 1 million barrels a day. However, officials acknowledge they're exempting 8 countries temporarily from these sanctions, allowing them to continue importing Iranian oil. The administration says it's only granting waivers to countries that are working with the U.S. to reduce their Iranian oil imports. Though in a statement, Senator Marco Rubio says, quote, sanctions waivers being given to key purchasers of Iranian oil, most alarmingly China, give Iran a financial reprieve and should be eliminated as soon as possible. Rubio also says the administration must do more to cut Iran from the international finance system and an entity called SWIFT that helps enable international transactions. Treasury Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says SWIFT will cut off all sanctioned banks as soon as it's technically possible. And there are other challenges, notably the countries that are still in the Iran nuclear deal, Britain, Germany, France, China, and Russia, that are trying to hold this together and continue conducting business with Iran. Harris?
Rich Edson, thank you very much. Joining me now with more on this, Mark Dubowitz, CEO of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's also advised Secretary Pompeo's team and helped Congress write the very sanctions now being reimposed. Sorry to talk about you in the third person for a minute, but I wanted people to know the importance of why we have you on the program today. So tell me about these sanctions specifically. Do they affect oil? What do they affect?
Well, the sanctions that are coming back on Monday are going to affect Iran's ability to attract investment in its energy sector, export its oil, which accounts for about 70% of its export earnings. It's also going to affect Iran's ability to access the global financial system, to move money around, to repatriate foreign exchange for its reserves, to defend its currency. So these sanctions are maximum pressure, and they're maximum financial pressure.
And what does that mean for the people on the ground in Iran? Because they will eventually, as they have in the past, I would imagine, rise up and become part of the conversation again.
So they've already actually risen up. Since December, there have been protests all over around Iran. There have been strikes by teachers and truck drivers. And what's interesting is the protests are really these are the political base of the regime. These are blue-collar workers who normally have supported the regime but are now on the streets yelling, death to the supreme leader, death to President Rouhani. Why are you spending billions of dollars supporting Bashar Assad's slaughter in Syria and funding Hezbollah instead of taking care of us? So the regime is being squeezed by the Trump administration, externally and internally by Iranians who are very frustrated and angered by the regime.
And is there any reaching out that we would do as this country to those people on the ground?
Secretary Pompeo has really had, I think, a really robust public diplomacy strategy in really reaching out to the Iranian people through Farsi language Twitter, through broadcasting, through speeches that he's given, and really underscoring that this is a wonderful culture, wonderful people with a great history. I mean, the only place where Iranians don't succeed around the world is inside Iran because the Islamic Republic represses them and deprives them of opportunity. So he's made those points. He's underscored that. That's been backed by the president and others. And I think that messaging campaign is critical going forward.
So, Mark, these reimposed sanctions go into play on Monday. And then as we look ahead to 2019, I've heard you say that things could get worse for Iran. How so?
They're going to get worse for the Islamic Republic because the State Department under Secretary Pompeo's leadership hasn't stopped reducing Iranian oil exports. I mean, what he's done is he's carefully calibrated how to take 1 million barrels off without spiking the price of oil, and he's been enormously successful in doing that. You know, the price of Brent is the same as it was when the president withdrew from the deal in May. So that's quite a remarkable achievement. Going into 2019, they're going to be locking up Iranian oil revenue, so Iran has limited ability to spend it and can only spend it on humanitarian goods. And as oil markets loosen, the State Department is really committed to taking another 500,000, 800,000 barrels a day offline. So the regime is going to continue to be squeezed. And on the financial side, Secretary Mnuchin has been as successful in designating banks and designating 700 Iranian entities, 300 more to come, and cutting off Iran's access to the global financial system.
That is fine. That's fascinating to me because now the question becomes, with all that in play, does this bring Iran back to the negotiating table or not?
It's an open question. The Iranians are always defiant until they actually, the day before they decide to come back. We've seen that in the past. I think that the Iranian strategy for now may be to count on their hope that President Trump is a one-term president and wait him out for 2 years and maybe get a president in the White House in 2021 who takes America back into the deal and isn't willing to be as tough. So that is the strategy. The question is, can they make it over 2 years? And what happens if they're wrong and President Trump actually has 6 years to impose maximum pressure? That may be a very difficult strategy to maintain.
I've always thought, like a government agency that you put in place, it's hard to go back to what previously was there with any government. So if they're waiting out our politics, that seems like a fruitless strategy, but they'll have to deal with it because those sanctions are in play, reimposed on Monday. Mark, thank you so very much for giving us kind of an inside look on how you've been supporting the Secretary of State on those sanctions against Iran. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Democrats are honing in on a key opportunity in Arizona to flip a red state blue. a Senate seat there. But will Democrat Kyrsten Sinema be able to edge out Republican Martha McSally? Breaking down a critical race right here on... Well, I know from being in the state, all eyes are on this tight Senate race in Arizona ahead of Election Day. Democrat Kyrsten Sinema facing off against Republican Martha McSally. Democrats see it as a historic opportunity to turn the deep red seat blue. But it's going to be tough. The latest Fox News polling showing them tied at 46%. Go live now to senior correspondent Alicia Acuna in the great state of Arizona in Phoenix. Beautiful day, Alicia.
Gorgeous day here in Phoenix, Arizona, and you're right, with that razor-thin race going on here, Democrats really see an opportunity to gain a seat they haven't had since 1995, but Republicans are spending big to keep that from happening. Two-term Republican Congresswoman Martha McSally has had plenty of help in her corner, including events like yesterday with Donald Trump Jr. Much of the focus on voters getting those ballots in and also on immigration. McSally says she supports the president's crackdown on the asylum-seeking process, but that Congress needs to do its work too.
But in the meantime, the administration needs to do whatever it takes in order to keep our country and community safe and to stop having that draw of having people abuse our system. So let's get the legislation on his desk to fix it, and we'll continue to partner with them to make sure we're stopping the flow.
The president made a stop here earlier this month. His approval ratings here not as high as in other states, something that could help the Democrat three-term Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema. Her popularity has been growing even after making comments like Arizona is the meth lab for democracy. When asked about immigration, she usually steers back to the Democrats' talking points on health care. But when asked about the idea of revisiting the birthright citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment, she said this.
It's part of our American heritage, and I think this is a distraction from the issues that voters are really concerned about right now, which, as I hear from them every single day on the campaign trail, are focused exclusively, almost exclusively, on their concerns around protecting their access to health care.
And Harris, as you know, with a race this close, it's all about turnout. Harris?
Yes, and you mentioned incumbent. They both are representatives in that state, so it will be very interesting to see the battle ahead of Tuesday. Thank you, Alicia Acuna. Meanwhile, as we prepare for those election results to come in on Tuesday, I want to show you who I'll be hanging out with. Fox News has a new voter analysis system that will replace traditional exit polls. Arnon Mishkin, director of our Fox News decision team, joins us now to explain. So we're doing away with the exit polling, which really didn't help anybody in 2016.
Well, exactly. The exit poll was a wonderful institution for about 50 years, but in many respects, it's now sort of, I think, outlived its usefulness. And the main reason for that is because of the number of Americans who are no longer voting on Election Day. They're voting early. They're voting by absentee, by mail. 40% of Americans or more are voting that way. They never exit. They can't be polled in an exit poll. Yeah. Our friends in the other networks have, developed some systems for addressing that. We think the right thing to do was start with a new tool for finding out why people vote the way they did and how they voted.
What are we replacing it with?
Okay, we're replacing it basically 125,000 interviews that will be conducted both by 125,000. They will be conducted both by phone and over the internet of voters in all 50 states and scattered across the country. And we're going to be talking to early voters, we're going to be talking to Election Day voters, and most important, we're also going to be talking to voters who tell us that they're not voting this time around, they're sitting it out. And oftentimes in midterms, they're the decisive pool because either the Democrats are not excited and they stay home, or Republicans are not excited. Although increasingly in this year, it looks like everyone's excited, so that will be an interesting story.
You've been doing this a long time. How do you think that this information makes us more better positioned to tell people what's happening Tuesday night?
Okay, well, I think that if you look back at 2016, the interesting thing is all the polls were actually right. They accurately estimated that Hillary Clinton would win the national popular vote for president by more than 2%, which is basically what she did. Where we failed in 2016 was in looking state by state at how Trump was doing and how Hillary Clinton was doing. And what we have in America today is, to a certain extent, a very divided country. We're divided by demography, but we're also divided by geography. And so you need to look at each of the individual states to see how people really think. You shouldn't look just at national averages. We're going to be able to do polling. We are going to do polling in all 47 states that have statewide elections and give sort of detailed information on how people are thinking there.
All right. And you're also just not outside the studio where they're going to just turn this place into something fabulous, as we always do, Studio F. I think it stands for fabulous. But you're going to be on the second floor and just around the corner from where I'll be in the newsroom. It's a beautiful space. I'll have access to come over there. Real quickly, you also want to be able to assess the strength of Trump from 16 to 18.
We're going to be able to assess how Trump's strength has changed, what his job approval is across a whole set of dimensions, from the economy to immigration to borders to health care.
All right. All those hot topics. Arnon Mishkin. We'll see you Tuesday night. 6 p.m. Eastern is when the coverage starts, but you're already working. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks.
President Trump is doubling down on his push for border security amid the migrant caravan situation. But now some Republicans reportedly fear the president's hardline immigration stance could backfire at the polls. Republicans are saying that. So what's the potential political impact? Power panel.